Okay, now I'm going to have Hendric come up, and he's going to talk to us a little bit, and everyone's going to make fun of me because I said it wrong.
Got it almost. Was good. Well, hi everybody. It's good to be with you guys. I'm so happy that it worked out. I had some communication problems with Tracy. I had no network coverage out in Jewett, Ohio, and Tracy had problems to get a signal or something went wrong. And so finally, Kathy got hold of me yesterday night and asked me if I could come. And so I'm very glad for the chance to be with you guys and spend this last day of this convention together with you. I was asked to share a couple of minutes about my time in South Sudan. I've been a missionary in South Sudan for about 3 years. And I work together with SIM. It's called Serving in Missions. They're from North Carolina. And they had put a small team together in 2007. And it was one of the first teams that went in after the Civil War. South Sudan has gone through Civil War for about 50 years, with a small break in the 70s for about 6 or 7 years. So no mission work had been done in this country. And I went there in 2008 and served for 3 years as an evangelist. So I used to go into remote areas. Usually they would drop us with a truck or with a plane in some remote areas together with a local pastor, and we would move on by foot and just try to cover all the villages that were in an area. So we used to stay out there for about 2.5 months and just trying to reach the people with the gospel, preach the good word of Jesus Christ, pray for the sick, and just to spread the gospel as much as possible. And this topic that you guys chose, faith or fear, is something that I'm very familiar with. This time in South Sudan has been the toughest of my life these past 3 years. And I remember when I first got in, I was in Nairobi. The mission, SIM, was based in Nairobi, and the missionaries flew in into South Sudan. And I got on a small plane, a Cessna, and I was by myself, just together with a pilot. So we flew in, and he landed at a little airstrip at a village. We were supposed to pick up a missionary couple and then move on to Malakal, where I was supposed to be based. And I remember when we came down on this little airstrip, there was just a village, and it was just bush around it. And so when the pilot opened the door, I just felt the heat that hit me right away. And it was about 120 Fahrenheit. It was really, really hot. It's like just when you open the oven. And I just got outside, and then the people, the Sudanese, came, and of course they live in the mud huts together with their cattle, so they were dirty and stinky. And I just got so scared when I got out of this plane with the heat and these dirty people, and I just got afraid, and I said, God, I can't do this. I cannot serve for 3 years in this country. I will not make it. And so we moved on to Malakal, and I stayed there for a couple of days, and Malakal was kind of a hot spot. There was still fighting going on once in a while. And nobody knew when it would erupt. And I remember one night I was talking to a Sudanese guy. He knew some English, and we were just talking about all this fighting that was going on. And I always thought, like, when there's fighting, you just run and you'll be okay. But I realized it's not that easy. And so I remember we talked, and I told him, so what are you going to do when fighting takes place, when people start shooting? And he said, you just run. And if you make it, you're lucky, and if you make it not, then you'll die. And this answer just scared me to death, because I grew up in Germany, and I always expect to be like 70 or 80 years old. Like, I don't think about dying tomorrow. And it really scared me. And that night I went to bed, I couldn't sleep, and I said, God, I cannot serve you in this country for 3 years. I signed up for 3 years, but I'm not able to make it. And while I was lying in my bed and praying, I just heard that God was speaking to me. And he said, Hendric, he said, how far are you willing to go for me? You can stay at a mission compound, and you can stay with the other missionaries. You can be safe. If there's trouble, they will call with a satellite phone. The mission will send a plane and get you out of there. But you're an evangelist, and I want you to go into the remote areas to preach the gospel where it's not safe, where nobody can get you out. And I was right in that place where I had this fear, where I was so overwhelmed by fear, and I thought I couldn't make it. And God was giving me a calling to step out in faith and do what he wanted me to do. And I realized that even when I look in the Bible, when God calls people like Moses, like Esther, or like Gideon, wherever he called people, the first reaction of these people were fear. because they knew when God calls them something to do, they couldn't do it on their own. Their abilities were not enough. They knew they could only do it if they depend and trust in God. And I was always encouraged by these stories, and I said to God that night, this is what I want. I want to believe in you. I want to trust you. And if you want me to go out there and leave everything up to you, even if I come back or not, may it be so. So I went out and I did this for 3 years. I went into remote areas for about 2.5 months preaching the gospel. And as I said before, it was tough for me. Sometimes dealing with this heat, sometimes dealing with the loneliness, because the people just speak a native tongue. They don't know English. I wasn't able to communicate with anybody except my translator for 2.5 months sometimes. So I felt this loneliness. The food was not very good. It was kind of a semi-desert area. People were eating just sorghum. And there was no spices. There were no fruits. There were no vegetables. And it was so tough for me. And even the fear, because nobody knew where fighting would take place. Villages had been attacked, burned down. People were constantly living in fear. But what always broke my heart was when I went into these areas and I saw villages, thousands of people having never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, we live in the 21st century and we have so much technology in our homes. We're capable of so many things, but we still have failed to reach this world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. There are so many tribes who have never heard the good news. And I realized that most of these tribes, even if you bring Bibles, they cannot read them. So they need us to go to their places and tell them about Jesus. And many times when we walk to the bush, I'm usually not that scared of animals, but one particular kind of animals I don't like are snakes. And there are many of them in South Sudan. They have the black mamba, which is very poisonous. If the venom of a black mamba will kill an adult person. Even the cobras, the red cobra and the black cobra, if they bite an adult person, you might survive it if you're lucky, but you will be crippled for the rest of your life, or they have to amputate your leg. So it was very dangerous. And first time when I walked out in the bush and you just walk through this high grass, you can't anything, I was always scared to death because I wasn't sure if there's a snake somewhere. And I really had to trust God to protect us. And one day I was out with my friends. We were preaching in a village, and we wanted to leave this village around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and move on to the next village because it was about a 3-hour walk, and we wanted to get there before sunset. And so we made it that day. We finished around 3 p.m., and then we moved on to the next village. And while we're on the way, about an hour, I wanted to take my camera to take a shot of something. I don't remember what it was, but I was looking in my backpack, and I couldn't find my camera. And so I realized I must have left it in this village. And I said to these guys, to my translator, I said, I have to go back and get my camera because we will never go back in this village again, and I need it for pictures, for newsletters, and stuff like that. So, and my friends, they were tired, so I said, you guys just move on, and I will go back and get my camera, and I will meet you tonight in that village. So I walked back on my own, and I got back to this village, and I finally got my camera. I left it in a hut. And so I went back by myself, and I just followed a small path that was along the river so I couldn't get lost. And most of the time when I walked through the bush, I just started praying because it's nice and quiet out there and nobody's disturbing you, and I just used the walks for prayer. So, but because it was so late already, I couldn't make it before sunset, so while I was walking, it got dark. And so I just was following this path and I was praying, and then all of a sudden God spoke to me and he said, stop and take out your torch. And so I just stopped and I grabbed back in my backpack and took my torch and turned it on, and as I lighted on the path, I just saw that there was a snake right in front of me. And I wouldn't have seen it, but that day God really protected me from that snake. And God was faithful. Even though I was afraid and I didn't have much faith, I just walked and I just wanted to trust God. And so many times, me and my friends, we experienced that God was faithful. Another time I went into an area, I was called by a Sudanese guy. He was a pastor, and he said, in my area, people have not heard the gospel at all. There has never been a non-governmental organization or a mission worked in this area. And when he heard that I was going in these areas to preach, he said, why don't you come to my place? So I went into his area, and I knew that there had been fighting going on. There was a rebel leader fighting the army troops of South Sudan, the regular troops. But I didn't know how severe the fighting was. So I checked with the government office, and I asked them if it's okay for us to go into this area to preach and if it's safe. And this local administration gave us the permission to go. But the problem was that they lied to us. The area was not safe. There was still fighting going on. The soldiers were raping women, burning down villages. They killed young men they expected to be rebels. And nobody was allowed to go into this area. So because we got this wrong information, we went and we started preaching in some of the villages. And finally, as we came to a village, soldiers grabbed us and brought us to their place, to this military base. And so that night, they brought us to some generals, and they start asking questions. And they expected us that we were working together with this rebel leader, trying to pass on information. So they put us in jail. And the next morning, we were called to the general again. I wasn't allowed to call anybody, to call my mission, to tell them what was going on. They had taken all our stuff, and so he said, we want to take you to the next military station from where we do the operation, and they will decide what are we going to do with you guys. So that day we walked for about 9 hours through the bush, and we came to a small village which was near to a riverside. And the leading officer who escorted us decided to wait for a boat to come and pick us up, to bring us to the military base. But the problem was that no boat came into this area because it was a war zone. Nobody wanted to enter this village or this area. So, but God already was working without even us knowing it. And so there was a young man, he had a cell phone, and this area had like network coverage, and he called secretly a friend in Khartoum, and he said, hey, listen up, there's a missionary from SIM. He is in military prison, he is in trouble. You guys need to get out of him. I want you to inform the mission. So he called back and forth, and finally the mission got information that I was in prison, and they sent a friend of mine with a speedboat trying to find me. So Thomas came with a speedboat down the Nile River and going to these sidearms trying to find us. And after 3 days, he finally got to this military base where we were in this prison. And so he talked to this general who was leading the battalion in that area. And so he had us go to the headquarters of the military. And so we went there with a speedboat. And we went to this military base that was right in this big village. And so Thomas went to the local government office, and he talked to this deputy commissioner, and there was another guy who was responsible for the NGOs. And so they came to the general and tried to talk to him to get us out of prison. And this guy, he got so mad, he started yelling, and he put all of us in prison, including Thomas, who came to get me, and the local government people. And so we were stuck in this prison for over a week. And the first 2 nights, the first 2 days, I had interrogations. They were asking all kinds of questions, and they were threatening me to kill me or to hand me over to the soldiers to torture me if I do not say the truth or if I admit that I would work with the rebels. And so finally, after 7 days, they came in the morning with heavy machine guns, and they said, well, we cannot release you anymore. We have to bring you to the capital city, Juba, and others will decide your case. So we were brought to Juba, and finally, after 12 days imprisonment, they released us without saying any reason why we were caught or why they kept us in prison, but after 12 days, we were released. And during this time in prison, it was a time where I also experienced so much fear. Because I remember some nights the soldiers came and they pulled out prisoners, rebels, and they were just torturing them. And sometimes I just woke up, them screaming, hearing them screaming because they were so much in pain. And I wasn't sure if I would maybe be the next one that they will pull out and torture. And so I was just praying. And when I got out, later on, my friends told me that God really protected us in this time. Like the first day when they escorted us to this one village, we were walking about 9 hours through the bush, and we passed many villages. And most of these villages had battalions based there. And my friends told me that almost in every village, the soldiers were asking their leading generals and officers to have us stay for the night so they could torture the white men. So God really protected us. And another thing is, in the military prison in South Sudan, usually the soldiers will not feed you. So when you get in prison, your wife or your mom or maybe your sister has to move to that place, and they have kind of like work to earn some money, then they can cook food and bring it to you in the prison. And of course I didn't have anybody, but even there God provided. There was a young lady, her name was Rebecca, and I must have gone through her village a year before. I preached in her village, and she knew that I was an evangelist, and she got married to a soldier, and he was based right on this military base, right at the prison camp. And so she got married, and 3 days before I came into this prison, she moved to this military base. And when she saw that I came with my friends and that we were in prison, God used her to take care of me and my friends, and she started cooking tea for us and lunch and dinner, and God used her to provide for us. So I just want to encourage you that God is really faithful, and it's worth following him. And if God calls us something to do, you might be afraid. Of course you might, because God does not call us for things that we can do on our own. He always calls us that we can only do together with him. We cannot depend on our abilities, on our own strength, but we have to depend on him, and that's what faith means. So I just want to encourage you, if God wants you to do something for him, if God wants you to step out in faith, just follow him, because he is faithful and worth following. Thank you so much. God bless you.